In the heart of an abandoned suburb, tucked behind walls of wild, thorny roses, stood a pastel-colored cottage. Its once bright exterior had faded, the delicate paint chipped and peeling. The windows were darkened with years of grime, and the front door creaked with eerie persistence, despite having been locked for decades. The locals whispered about it, calling it the Dollmaker's workshop, a place that no child or adult should ever visit. The tale was passed down in hushed voices, shared only by those who dared to remember. Long ago, a toy maker named Evelyn had been known for her magical creations. She crafted dolls with an uncanny resemblance to real children, each one more perfect than the last. But what no one knew was the secret curse Evelyn had woven into every one of her creations. A motherless child, Evelyn had been driven to madness by grief. She believed that innocence, true, untainted innocence, was fleeting, and once lost could never be reclaimed. So she crafted her dolls not just to capture beauty, but to preserve it forever. To protect them from the harsh world, she cursed her creations with a terrible magic. They would live forever, frozen in time, just as children should be. Visitors often spoke of hearing soft lullabies drifting on the wind when they passed by the cottage, but the music was always wrong. The notes twisted in unsettling ways, descending instead of rising, playing backward as though some malevolent hand had reversed time itself. One night, a curious soul, a young girl named Clara, ignored the warnings and ventured to see the famed workshop for herself. She had heard of the strange happenings and the eerie beauty of the dolls, and her heart longed to discover the truth. With a mind full of wonder and a backpack packed with childish excitement, she made her way through the thick underbrush that had overtaken the cottage's front yard. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the world itself held its breath. She pushed open the gate, the creak of its metal hinges loud in the silence, and made her way to the cottage's door, which hung ajar. The scent of dust and stale air filled her nose as she stepped into the dim, shadowed room. Her eyes widened at the sight that met her. Hundreds of porcelain dolls filled the workshop, lined up along the walls, their glassy eyes staring lifelessly into space. Their faces were flawless, their cheeks flushed with a rosiness that was almost too perfect. But something was wrong. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though the dolls were watching her, waiting for her to make a move. Their eyes seemed to follow her every step. As Clara ventured deeper, her foot accidentally brushed against a small music box sitting on a dusty wooden table. It sprang to life, its tiny ballerina spinning in place, but the lullaby it played was twisted, distorted, a haunting melody played in reverse. The sound clawed at Clara's mind, sinking into her thoughts like poison. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw them. The dolls. They were moving. At first, it was subtle, a tilt of the head, a shift of the eyes. Then, with chilling certainty, they began to walk. Their porcelain limbs clicked unnaturally as they slowly advanced toward Clara, their eyes now dripping black tears. The tears fell like ink, staining their pristine skin, marking them as something otherworldly. The dolls whispered in hushed voices, their mouths moving, but their words were indecipherable. It felt as though they were speaking directly into her mind, coaxing her forward, urging her closer. Panicked, Clara turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind her with a loud thud. She was trapped. From the shadows emerged an old woman, her hair wild and unkempt, her eyes hollow but sharp. It was Evelyn, the dollmaker herself. "You shouldn't have come here, child," Evelyn said, her voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "I have worked so long to perfect them, to preserve their innocence. They are my children now, and they cannot be left alone." Clara took a step back, trembling. "What do you mean? What have you done to them?" Evelyn's eyes softened with a hint of sorrow. "I've preserved them, just like I must preserve you. You see, once a child enters my workshop, they are mine, forever. By dawn, you will be one of them." Clara's heart pounded as she tried to move, to scream, but her body felt heavy, frozen, as if the very air itself was closing in on her. The dolls surrounded her, their hollow eyes never leaving her face, their black tears seeping onto the floor like a dark tide. And then Clara saw it, the final doll. It stood in the farthest corner of the room, the last one Evelyn had ever created. Its porcelain face was the same as all the others, but its clothes were different, familiar. Clara stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. It was her childhood toy, A small stuffed bear with one eye sewn shut and a torn ear was now encased in porcelain, its soft fur replaced with smooth, cold ceramic. Her own eyes stared back at her from the doll's vacant face, her innocence, her youth, preserved forever in the doll's cold embrace. "You were always my favorite," Eveline murmured, almost lovingly. "I wanted to keep you, child. I wanted to preserve your innocence forever." As the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls, Clara's body began to stiffen, her limbs turning cold, her skin hardening, turning to porcelain. The dolls gathered around her, their black tears staining her new form, and by the time the sun rose, Clara was no longer a girl. She was just another doll in Eveline's perfect collection, her hollow eyes leaking black tears, forever watching, forever waiting. In the heart of the abandoned suburb, the Dollmaker's workshop remained, its doors always open for the next child who dared to seek the truth.